Evolution.org, Hardcore 2.0 is coming your way, episode 202, How to Bulk Up Using Deca and Dbol by Pharmaqo. So this is going to be a really good one. We're going to talk about Deca and dianabol 101. We're going to talk about why they are great in a bulk stack. We're going to talk about our own experiences with Deca and Dbol. We're going to talk about how to stack them in a cycle. And we're going to mix in, diet and training strategies throughout the podcast as well that will help you get more out of your bulk and take advantage of these amazing steroids. And then we're going to talk about why Pharmaqo, which is a fantastic brand that we've been using for many years and professionals are using all the way up to the Mr. Olympia stage. Firstly, remind everyone we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. We are an organic podcast, meaning we go from the ground up. We don't just start our podcast, buy a bunch of followers and buy a bunch of views and all this stuff like these other podcasts. You know, we, we're organic. We want to do it the right way. We want to grow the channel the right way. So this is something that Mobster and I do. This isn't our full-time job like these other lazy YouTubers out there or lazy podcasters that just want to do podcasts, for a living. This is something we do because we enjoy doing this and we enjoy spreading knowledge. And look, I always talk about it. One day you're going to die. One day we're going to die. What do you want to do after you die on your deathbed? Do you want to look back and say, yeah, I left a legacy of helping people achieve their dreams of, physical, mental strength and size and all that other stuff? Or do you want to die knowing, yeah, I did not contribute anything back to this world? So look, it's very important for us that all of you understand that you're also part of our podcast and we're a community podcast. It's kind of like a crowdfunding podcast where everyone participates. So make sure you're subbing us, make sure you're liking us, you're adding us to your favorites, you're telling your friends and family, giving us reviews and all that good stuff, commenting. This way it helps the algorithms pick us up and helps us continue to grow organically. So let's get into it, Mobster. Deca 101. So let me touch a little bit about this. I know you're a huge fan of Deca. So I, grew up as the skinny kid, ectomorph, whatever. I can remember when I was a freshman in high school, I think I weighed like 115 pounds, something like that. I was always the skinny kid. I went out for football. They didn't even give me my own locker. I was so skinny. They didn't even give me any. I was the skinny, fast kid. So the coaches, they didn't give me even a chance. Like, I walked in there, and I was like, they're like, oh, okay, you're going to have to share a locker with someone else. Like, they wouldn't even give me my own locker. That's how little they thought of me. And I was like probably like 7th-string player. So they'd put me in at the end when the score was like 50-0. So I was a skinny kid. So once you get older, you're like, man, it's always you want the opposite. If you grew up the fat kid, you want to be skinny. If you grew up the skinny kid, you want to be big. So it's like I want to get big. So my first injectable steroid stack for me was Deca. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit of our own personal experiences. But let me tell you something about Deca. Deca will boost your appetite like crazy. And that's one of the benefits it has. Now, why does that happen? So let's talk about Deca 101. Why does Deca boost appetite so well? Well, it's because the way it was designed. It was designed basically, they took the testosterone molecule and they altered it, that 19 atom, okay, 19 nor atom, they altered it. So they're removing its ability to aromatize as quickly and as much as testosterone, and they remove the ability of the steroid to be as androgenic as testosterone. So you're not getting that as much of an androgenic effect. So when that happens, okay, what are the end effects? The end effects are you're getting testosterone with altered state of that compound. So in the end, it becomes a fantastic steroid to bulk because as much as testosterone, your appetite increases. On Deca, it's going to increase even more because now you're removing the estrogenic and androgenic effects, you see. So it's like testosterone without those other things in there, which will affect your appetite negatively. Even though testosterone will increase your appetite, it will still bring it back down because of those effects in the body, like higher estrogen, for example, higher androgens in your system. You ever feel that like when you like have a really hard workout, you get a little nauseous, you lose your appetite for a couple hours, like, oh, I don't want to eat anything. So it's the same logic. When you get really androgenic in your system, you get a lot of inflammation in your system. That's what tends to happen. Our appetite goes back down. So with DECA, it doesn't have that effect. So you're basically getting that free effect of a boost in appetite. This is why it makes such a great bulker because of that effect that it has. So Mobster, touch on DECA a little bit one on one. It's been around a long time.
Yeah.
It's helped people with anemia and boosting red blood cell and all that stuff
Yeah,
from a medical
yeah. I was
perspective,
just
but
thinking of the
for bodybuilding,
medical
yeah.
applications. Yeah, so we've talked about how certain steroids were deliberately, as Steve just said, there to help you with anemia, to literally build up the blood corpuscles in your blood because of a medical condition. Others were there to help you retain muscle for certain aggressive medical conditions, for example, cancer. The classic, which I've talked about before, is a burns victim. We're talking about obviously the worst kind of burns, and your body literally goes into a catabolic state. It's trying to preserve the muscle tissue while you lay there and recover from this horrific burn that you've had. The burn itself is obviously just a massive stress on your body, so the body's trying to repair that tissue. And some steroids were there to help you retain tissue, some were there to help you build up tissue. If you are affected by a medical condition and vastly underweight, are there certain medical applications that literally stimulate the appetite? So again, these are certain specific medical conditions, certain circumstances. It might be post-surgery where you're not allowed to move. The last thing you'd want you to do is go in there at normal body weight, Steve, with some horrendous issue to deal with and lose 30 or 40 pounds because we know it gives your body nothing to work with. Whether it's fat for energy, whether it's breaking down muscle for energy, and so on and so forth. So you'd be in a worse condition. Bad enough you've got the medical issue, but you now have lost weight and you're really struggling to be mobile. You become frail and unwell on top of whatever you've got to deal with. So again, certain steroids were there to help you retain tissue, and as an example here, to stimulate their appetite. Now, Steve and I will talk about this with our experiences. It for some people, and we'll definitely deal with this. It is just an amazing appetite stimulant. I would argue that just in the last couple of years, I haven't, for whatever reason, had the massive boost. But back in the day, and I'll get into this later on, it's just been absolute fucking mental. So, yeah, Deca is kind of legendary. I think there's even an application here, Steve, which we talk about a little bit, but it's not really part of the show because we're talking about bulking today, about the uptake or uptick, as I've described it on the forums, a small uptick in collagen synthesis. So certain people will say, I think you've just described this also when you said, old guys like me love Deca. And the reason for that is that small uptick temporarily, as I have pointed out on the forums, in collagen synthesis, which means if you're having joint problems from the training, from your volume, from wear and tear, just from being an old fuck, Deca seems to help you on cycle, certainly relieve some of that stress, relieve some of those aches and pains, and so on and so forth. And there's multiple reasons for that, the least of which is that uptick in collagen synthesis. The problem is, as I've just to finish this thought, Steve, as I've described it, it's an uptick in collagen synthesis while you're on. There has been, if you have a medical condition that involves issues with collagen synthesis and they give you DECA, that's fine. But you have to remember, as a listener, most of you are hitting the gym. And if you're an old fuck like me and you've been pounding away on your joints with too much volume, not enough rehab, etc., and DECA suddenly comes to relieve you, too many people will make the statement of it helps fix your joints. Yes, but in the lab and in those studies, it's arguable because you're treating a medical condition and these people aren't hitting the gym and they aren't pounding the fuck out of the joints. It's a little bit less temporary. In other words, it's a bit more ongoing. But the reality is most of us do lift and we are pounding our joints. And so part of the problem is you do get that uptick on cycle, but you won't necessarily retain the uptick, the improvement off cycle, and some of it just to be an arse thing because some of us do stupid shit and we carry it on doing stupid shit while we're training, i.e., too much volume and on our joints. And we do that when we come off cycle and we actually end up worse, or at least back to square one, than when we started. So you have to keep that in mind, guys. It can help you feel more comfortable with stuff you've been doing on cycle, but I don't think it is a permanent solution in that particular regard. You're not going to do one cycle of Deca and suddenly your elbow is going to heal up and that's perfect forever. That's not going to happen. And you need to understand sometimes it's just a stupid shit that we do in the gym or exercises that we really like that perhaps healing our joints and perhaps we need to rotate those exercises, do more rehab, ice, heat, etc., and those habits and even joint products. So yeah, that's one of the benefits. The diet things, the other, and the classic bulking thing, Steve. And I'll get this into the personal experiences. I've put on loads of weight many times on a Deca and Sustanon cycle. And I'll talk about during my own experiences just how crazy that's been at times. What about yourself, Steve, in terms of how you felt using the Deca, especially for the joint issues, Steve?
Yeah, I want to get into that when we talk about our own experiences, but one of the things I wanted to add was that because, as I said, DECA was so good when it was designed to help with muscle wasting anemia and in medical perspective in bodybuilding, you'll want to use it primarily for mass and strength. So it is not a good cutter at all. We've had the arguments back on the old EF forum back in the days where guys would have these, wacky theories. And one of the theories was, when it came to Deca and Dbol, which we're going to get to shortly, is that these steroids, yeah, you can cut on any steroid, you can bulk on any steroid. And look, at the end of the day, that is technically true, but it would be like putting, the if you have a fit,
It's like using a drag
yeah.
racing funny car to go to the shop to collect your shopping. It's
Yeah,
not the
I
best
was gonna
thing.
use a car analogy. I was gonna say it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
using the cheapest tire that you get from the Walmart to put on your sports car that you just bought. You just spent all this money on a sports car, but you're gonna put $50 tires on it. You want to put the like $500 tires on it. So it just doesn't make any sense. Technically, yes, you can put the $50 tire on it, but this car is not gonna corner the way you want. The treads aren't gonna, stick the way you want. Does that make sense? So you want to use these steroids to their benefit. So look, at the end of the day, if you're looking to cut, go listen to our cutting podcast that we do on the cutting options. But on this situation, this is a bulk and this is a mass stack. So it works amazingly well for that. Let's get into dianabol a little bit. Dianabol, look, it's the number one. I'm going to give you a fact. It's the number one used oral steroid of all time. Okay. And even today, it is the number one used oral steroid, believe it or not. And the reason for that is that it is so cheap. Okay. You can buy an entire cycle of Dianabol for less than it costs you to go take your car to a decent car wash. That's how cheap Dianabol is. So, throughout history, we've seen guys, 80s, 90s, 2000s, we've seen guys, who use steroids that, it was one of those things where, the only people who use steroids were white collar, accountants, doctors, lawyers, business owners, people like that. Nowadays, we see it more and more. Even, blue collar working class guys, construction workers, electricians, all kinds of plumbers are using steroids now because they're affordable. Well, back in those days, what could the blue collar working class people afford? They could always afford Dianabol. And Deca is not an expensive one either, by the way, but Dbol is dirt cheap. So you can do like a 4 week Dbol cycle for like less than $50. I mean, it's nothing. So that's the good thing about Dianabol, and that is why it is. And the second reason, and that's why it's the most popular steroid of all time, and most popular bot oral steroid even today, according to the studies and according to sources. If you ask sources, talk to any source, maybe your gym dealer, and ask him what's the number one oral steroid that you sell. He's probably going to say Dianabol. It just depends on where you live, of course. If you live like in California, they're probably going to go for something for cutting because if you live in a beach town, they're going to want to cut. But if you live in most of America, where most people are more interested in getting stronger and getting bigger, then you're probably going to see dianabol as the number one purchase oral. So at the end of the day, we got to remember when it comes to these oral steroids, again, just like with Deca, dianabol was designed for muscle wasting. It was designed for anemia. It was designed to basically make a person bigger. I don't know, Mobster, why don't you get into dianabol a little bit? Talk about the
Yeah,
Olympics and
the
how the
history thing.
Dr.
Yeah,
John Ziegler, talk about that a
that's
little
I
bit.
was
Yeah.
just thinking that. So Steve knows that I'm a fan somewhat of the history of the Iron Game, and there's a book, the name of which escapes me, but I think the subtitle is Manly Training or something like that at York Barbell by John D. Fair, I believe, and it talks about the whole York Barbell, Bob Hoffman, who was pretty much the man for putting together the American Olympic weightlifting team, and how Ziegler is a good part of the story. Uh, heard this, he went to Russia or Bulgaria or somewhere like that and saw the athletes and saw that they were starting to win world records and championships and stuff like that, and was an actual doctor, ironically, nothing to do with chemistry or pharmacology. And the story goes that he managed to sit down and have several beers with one of the Russian coaches. And he said, I'd seen this going on. I've seen that going on. What the fuck am I looking at? And they explained how they'd been doing massive amounts of state sponsored research into these anabolic medications, and we were using them with their athletes. He came back, so the story goes. I've heard slightly different versions of this. Went to believe CIBA, CIBA, which was a big pharmaceutical company in America, and said, "This is, and you guys listen to the story." They went through their chemistry books, they went through their androgen and anabolic reference books, which were in the university libraries, this kind of stuff, and the pharmacological company libraries, and came across these things and said, "This sounds very similar to this." And essentially, in a simplest argument, narrative type of way, came up with the idea for dianabol, introduced it to the York Barbell athletes. Lo and behold, of course, they told other people. You've also got the whole hippie vibe, Steve. So one of the things he got pissed off about, as a side story, was that he had them using very, very small doses. I believe somewhere between 5 and 15 milligrams. And you shouldn't use more than this. And I just also finished reading Steroid Nation. And in one of the things of Steroid Nation, Steve, it talks about how one specific American football team, it might have been hockey, but I think it was in the locker room, and they had a bowl of blue pills, which would be dianabol, in this fucking bowl, and the guys would just take a handful and pop some into their mouth, put some in their pocket. So they really wasn't doing the 30 to 50 milligrams type stuff that we'll talk about when we talk about stacking dianabol and using dianabol dosages and so on later on. He actually kind of got annoyed because instead of having the dosage that he was suggesting, it was getting a bit carried away. You can still buy a T-shirt, and I've even used this turn of phrase just because it amuses me, where it says Dianabol Breakfast of Champions. And especially back in the 60s and going into the 70s, it was probably, as Steve said, it statistically still is, but there wasn't a lot else available. It's probably the steroid that your favorite athlete, strength athlete, or hockey player, American football player, some basketball players, certainly anything involving strength, certainly the bigger athletes, and especially bodybuilding and weightlifting, obviously, almost certainly the first steroid of any description any of them ever saw, never mind took. And as Steve said, from there till now, chemically speaking, it's relatively simple to make. It's the one that they're going to substitute for more expensive orals. If they want a fake Anavar, they'll give you Dbol sometimes. Certainly was the case back in the day. It is so fucking cheap. I haven't heard of anybody faking Dianabol for a very long time. The closest, and again from my experience, was me being given tablets that had fuck all in them. But even then, it's kind of one of those silly things. It's so easy to make. It's so cheap to make. It's so cheap to produce. It's so cheap to put out there that it's not worth fucking around with, dosage wise, and so on and so forth. And again, we've literally covered on a show the top 5 orals. and I think the top five injectables. And one show we did some time ago, a year or so back, and they did a survey which was national in America, and it was like the top 10, top five of all, both of these, and all was in injectables. And dianabol was, I believe, number one, and I think anabol was number two, Steve. And testosterone was number one on obviously injectables. That hasn't changed for 20 or 30 years. And the reasons why are quite simple, because this shit works. You want to bulk with Dbol, and especially if you want to bulk with Dbol and Deca, or even kickstart a Deca cycle with Dbol, the growth is very, very quick. The effects, the positive and the negatives, but the positive especially, are very, very quick. It's almost, I put it down to this, and we will talk about the training and diet as well. If you do the things you're supposed to do in the gym, at the kitchen table with your knife and fork, and you taking Diana and your Dynabol, and you're taking Deca, I would almost fucking rubber stamp, give you an iron cast guarantee that if you're not bulking, there's something medically the matter with you. You should be able to put on, even if it's only on cycle, fucking size. It's that simple. It's that straightforward, Steve. This is the reason why, and people will make other choices later on, Steve, with their aims move, their body condition changes. But I would say that an enormous amount of people, unless they specifically was working with a coach who led him in a different direction, the great and vast majority of people that have tried these two will say, yeah, bulk me up. I put on too much, I got too heavy. They bulked up too quickly. It was almost, that's how fucking successful they are at bulking. That's how good they are. Let me go into the next subject a little bit here, Steve, in terms of
Yeah.
um
Well, let me finish up a little
yeah,
bit on
go on.
Dbol. I have
Yeah,
a couple
yeah.
things to
Talk
say.
about it a little bit more, and then we'll talk about the training
Yeah.
and diet.
Yeah, I'll kind of transition to that. But here's the thing. The main issue with dianabol to watch out for, when we're talking about Dbol 101, is the rapid aromatization of estrogen that you're going to get on it. So literally within days, it's aromatizing at heavy amounts in your system. It's in your system quicker. It's got a short half-life. So a lot of people like to take it twice a day for that reason, because it has a short half-life. So very important to be aware of that before you use it if you are estrogen prone. And always you want to keep an AI on hand. And like Deca, you expect explosive appetite increases on it within days. So you got to make sure that you have your diet on point. You're eating a lot of quality and nutritious foods. Just because your appetite goes up doesn't mean, and we talk about nutrition a little bit. Maybe Mobster, you can touch on, your nutrition and stuff. But just because your appetite goes up does not give you the green light to go and eat, junk food and fast food and restaurant food and all this other crap. You need to eat healthy, nutritious food so you put on quality mass. The worst thing you can do is dirty bulk on it. I've seen too many people over the years dirty bulk on Deca and Dbol, and that weight that you put on is all water and fat. It's not muscle. So we want to make sure that we're putting on good quality muscle tissue, and that's really important. But at the end of the day, you know, Dianabol, look, it's an amazing oral steroid, and it's not expensive at all. So if you don't want to spend a lot of money and you want to keep things, simple and very dummy proof, this is a great, great option. Go ahead, Monster.
So there's an argument to be made, and Steve's just touched upon it. Back in the day, especially, and I'm talking about the 50s through to the 80s, Steve, bulking was just getting as big as a house. And I mean, literally 10, 15, 20 pounds in the off season, especially. It's a great time in the winter and the cold months, wherever you are, to grow. And physically, it's okay to be a little bit out of shape, a little bit overweight. No one's going to see your six pack. You're dressed up in a jumper and a coat and a scarf and your gloves, yeah, in the house. All right, we've got central heating and shit, but again, even indoors with the central heating, you're still probably going to be sitting there in the t-shirts or shorts at the least. No one's going to see the veins and stuff like that. So traditionally, we used to do arguably closer to a dirty bulk than we do now. What we found over time, and especially in modern society, and even the athletes that were doing it at the time, Steve, they got sometimes a little bit too out of shape, a little bit too much water, a little bit too much fat. And so what we talk about now is lean mass. Now, I will free say that, and I made a note of this while Steve was talking during the intro. When I say lean mass, I'm talking about don't be afraid to put on 6 or 7 pounds of tissue and have 4 or 5 pounds of that be solid muscle that you will retain, all things being equal. That's training and diet related again, post cycle. What I see a little bit of, and is the red flag, is the warning, is some of you will freak the fuck out. And what do I mean? I guess, okay, so if you're used to walking around with a six pack and veins and separation in your quads and seeing certain details, sometimes when you bulk up a little bit, it's almost like a dysmorphic red flag. Oh my God, I can't see my top, bottom row of abs. Oh my God, I can't see those little lines that I see in the corner of my deck, my chest and pec deck tying. I can't see that vein in my arm that I normally see. And freak the fuck out and do a mini cut. Listen, get comfortable with getting bigger. Get comfortable with walking around a little bit heavier. So that's the diet stuff. The diet specifically, it requires you to eat more food. This isn't complicated. Muscle's not made out of thin air. I have seen examples, and I said to Steve to the sheep pre-show, when Steve talks about the community, this is where that stuff comes in. On occasion, we have seen comments on the forums and obviously in the comments below these podcasts that we do via YouTube, etc., where a person has gone on cycle, used what we would call a bulking cycle, like Deca and Dbol, only gained a few pounds. Well, first off, that's still pretty fucking good. But 9 times out of 10 is because they can't get their head round or they just struggle to eat more anyway. Deca's really good for that, as we said. And they can't get their head round eating more. And so it doesn't have to be a huge amount, Steve. It could be 500 to 1,000 calories above baseline. And that doesn't have to be a lot of food, although Deca does make it easy to eat a relatively larger amount of food. It might just be one more clean, healthy, properly ratioed snack. 500 or 600 calories, Steve. That could be, as an example, I've done stuff back in the day, which was a 4 ounce steak and 3 boiled eggs. That's something stupid like 50 or 60 grams of protein right there. There's a little bit of fat, there's a little bit of carbs in there, but that was just enough, 400 calories, to take me up to 1, 2, 3 more pounds at the end of the cycle. And it might be something as simple as that. It could be, although I'm not a huge fan of this, post training's fine, but not necessarily during the day. It could be a weight gaining, but high protein weight gaining type drink. It could just be a protein drink, more than you would normally have. You need to be comfortable with the idea of eating more food. Training. Steve and I have talked about this on other shows, and we'll talk about this in our personal experience, just what this fucking feels like, food and training wise. You, all things being equal, and there's always going to be the outlier, Steve, all things being equal, guys, you need to be doing more of the heavy shit. And by heavy shit, I mean more weight for the same number of reps as before, or less, which is even better, on the big exercises. And when I say big exercises, I'm talking about the ones that people don't like to do. So, for example, chin ups or pull ups. If you can do those with weight hanging off, so much the better. Dips. Again, if you can do those with weight hanging off, so much the better. Bench press, heavy. Squatting, heavy. Leg press, heavy. Pressing overhead with a barbell or dumbbells, heavier than before. The big, heavy shit. You go to most gyms, Steve, and it's especially true to women, of course, that some of the younger guys, quote unquote, don't want to get too big. So you'll see a lot of isolation exercise, a lot of body weight type stuff, a lot of Bulgaria split squats, etc. But what you won't see is big motherfuckers deadlifting, squatting, bench pressing, dips, and chins. Now you can do the other stuff. Obviously, we're talking about body. The majority of people listening to the show are bodybuilders. We're not asking you to be weightlifters, but if you want to stimulate the most muscle mass and you want to quote unquote bulk by add lean muscle tissue with a little bit of fat and a little bit of water, you need to be comfortable with the idea of big, heavy shit done for reps while you're in a bulk. The way that I've used this phrase recently, and someone actually liked this on the forum, Steve, and I said, and I actually got this from Arnold Schwarzenegger, you slap on the clay and then you shape the physique. So you are bulking to give your body something to fucking work with. You cannot go, you can have a very nice looking 12-inch bicep, But realistically, what we're looking at here, guys, and I'm talking about the average here, what we really want is a really nice looking 15 or 16-inch bicep. We want some size and some shape. It's that combination. Well, I've seen tiny little Indian guys that weighed 100 pounds with amazing six packs, but it's like I couldn't eat a whole one at once. When you look at the freaks in the magazine to motivate and inspire you, you need to understand that bigger gives you something to work with. Being bulked and then chiseling away like a sculptor to see the detail, to work the quality, to shape the muscle, to bring out the outer head of your bicep, the inner head, inner thigh, and so on and so forth. You could do that stuff for skinny fuck, but realistically, you want to have a certain degree of muscle, and that will involve growing. And growing comes from every shit, 4 reps, not singles like I might do, or doubles like I might do, or even triples, but 8 to 12 repetitions with heavier load than before on the big exercises, and not being afraid to put another plate of food on the table. 4 meals, or 3 meals and a protein drink, or 3 meals and a couple of protein cookies, or something similar, even just scrambled eggs on toast, Steve. You have to be comfortable. Now, understand, as I finish this for, that we all have different aspirations in the gym. Not every single person here wants to be 300 pounds. Some of you'd love to be 200. Some of you'd love to be 250, whatever. Some people might want a 16, some people might want an 80 in each arm. Each of you's got your own particular journey, but bulking is relatively simple, relatively straightforward, and it's number one, diet, and number two, training. Get those things in place, and then use Deca and Dbol. And it's like I said earlier, I could almost carve your name into a piece of stone going, this motherfucker's going to bulk up, Steve. Let's talk about briefly in a stack. Look, it's that synergy thing, isn't it, Steve? If one works, there's an argument to be made. It doesn't apply to everything. It absolutely doesn't apply to everything. But if one works, the two together will fuck. What I said about cast iron guarantee, look, it's almost a classic, Steve. It's one of those. If you can't grow on these two, especially combined, what the fuck are you doing? And it's going to be diet training I'd have to look at, or you're using an unapproved source that's not like Pharmaqo. So one of the things I actually said this in my show notes, Steve, is kickstarting. I would argue that Deca's relatively quick to work, but some of you might like to start your cycle just for the first week or so with some Dbol straight away. You want to run the oils relatively short, and we'll talk about that later on. We'll talk about products and stacking and so on and so forth, and then the Deca. So yeah, look, Steve. Again, it's the whole combination of fucking things. We talk about one of my favourite bulkers of all time when it comes to injectables is Deca and Sustanon, and I've had great results of that. I don't have great results in Deca on its own. Yes, Dbol, absolutely. But this is one of those, and the only reason we're doing this show is because we literally looked at the questions you guys were asking, and someone said, "What would happen if I used Deca and Dbol on the bulk?" Well, here we are, motherfuckers. This is one of those. You're going to grow. If you get these things right, you're going to grow, Steve. So yeah, on to the next subject.
Yeah, and your appetite's going to be so crazy. You're going to be wanting to eat 6 to 8 meals. I'm going to talk a little bit at when it comes. Let me talk about my own experiences, and then Mobster, I'll give you the floor to talk about yours. So I talked about earlier how I was only 115 pounds when I first got into high school. I went out for the football team. They wouldn't even give me my locker. The coaches wouldn't even give me a chance to play. I was fast. I was as fast as really anybody on the team. Maybe a hair slower than like the fastest dude, but because of my size.
I was going to joke with you. We don't let Steve have his own locker now.
Yeah, at the Evo headquarters, they don't even let me have my own locker now because of my height now. I'm like the shortest moderator, I think. But seriously, like at the end of the day, Dbol, being my first steroid, I added 20 pounds to my frame so quickly on it. And I noticed another thing I noticed too was the explosive pumps, which was unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. I can remember, as a teenager working out and I'd have pumps. I'd go to failure. I'd go do 20, 25 reps, 30 reps, and I'd get that burning. And I would read a lot of weightlifting books, so I understood the burning, was good. When you feel the burn, you got to push through that burn and go to exhaustion and go to failure. So I knew I had to push myself through it. And that burn was incredible. And I'd leave as a teenager, I'd ride my bicycle home after I went to the gym, right? it'd be like a mile home, and I'd be riding my bicycle. I remember my calves were like fucking felt like they were gonna explode, and my arms, I couldn't even ride my bicycle. I couldn't, put my arms on the and hands on the bicycle handle because of the pumps to my biceps and my triceps on when I would work my arms, and when I worked my legs, it was the same thing. It would be so hard to bicycle. It was like, man, I was like bicycling, dragging something behind me. It was crazy. I had like no strength left. Well, using Dbol was that times like five. It was insane. I never experienced these pumps before, and I'd read, did my research ahead of time, so I knew about the legendary Dbol pumps. But unless you actually experience it, you've no clue, like no fucking clue about it. So I was so blown away by by the D-Bowl pumps. Another thing too was the fast strength gains within the first few days on it. I remember, I remember the first week on it. I think it was like 4 or 5 days into it. I was doing my pushing split, and I was benching, and the same amount of weight I was able to do for 6 reps, literally 4 or 5 days prior, I was able to do for 8 reps. So I was able to add 2 reps just within the first 4 or 5 days. And I like smiled. I was like doing it, and I was like smiling. I was like, wow. I remember the first couple reps were so fucking light, mobster, like so fucking light. And I was like, wow, this shit really does work. These steroids really do work. Now comes the Deca. I had a hard time getting satiated on Deca. I remember how much size that I put on. I remember my chest, neck, and shoulders got as wide as a house on the stuff. It got so bad that I had to get like a new pillow. I had to one of those like hug pillows. I had to put a pillow between my knees because my muscles were getting so big and so fast that my body, it was affecting my sleep. I can remember I went to a company dinner. I was deep into a Deca cycle. It was probably my second cycle of Deca. And I was at a company dinner, Christmas dinner that we used to have every year. And I had to order 2 full course meals because after I ate the first meal, I had to call the waiter. I was like, dude, hey, order me another. I had like chicken or something. I was like, order me a steak this time. And he's like, oh, it's going to take some time. I said, don't worry about it. Take your time and make it. Trust me, I'm still going to have an appetite before it gets to you. So it's just like an unlimited satiation where you're going to be eating 6 or 8 meals a day. No problem. You wake up, you'll eat a meal. You go work out, you'll come home, you'll eat a meal. It's just like you're gonna want to do nothing but eat and work out on this stuff. And that's what it's all about when it comes to bulking. Mobster, tell us about your own experiences with Deca
I'm
Dbol.
just thinking of you. Just reminded me, Steve. I've got my old business partner, Mike, and one of my training buddies down here, Shay. Eat like someone's going to steal their food. Shay, I've been out eating with Shay, just as an example, where the Deca thing comes in, where we both ordered a mixed grill, and he's had a burger and chips to start while we're waiting for the mixed grill. How the fuck are you putting that food away? One of the things I've told Steve on these shows, I said that I've had Deca and Sustenance that I mentioned to you guys earlier, where I would literally be thinking about the next meal while I'm eating the meal. It is normal human physiology to eat a meal, and if you wait a few minutes, you will feel satiated. I was fucking feeling hungry for the next meal while I was eating that meal. I've described on, and I'll talk about both of these, Steve. On Deca, combined with sustenance, putting on, I would go from £280 to £300. First couple of times I ever did that, and it was actually physically uncomfortable walking upstairs because £20 that fucking quick, my body hadn't got used to. So literally, my cardio was off the shit. My strength would be through the roof. That was when I was competing regularly, Steve, in various countries, including America, and traveling Sweden, Germany, America, I believe, 4 times, Sweden 3 times, Spain once, Germany once, and so on and so forth. Regularly competing, including the Arnold Mighty Mitts 2010, and my latter competitions were all done on Deca and Suston on Dbol.
How was
Dbol was
that
my
when
first.
traveling when it came to your appetite? What did you do?
Traveling wasn't something. You just reminded me something else. Sorry, I just remembered. So I believe I actually did a little bit of Dbol or Deca around one of the OHF dinners, and we had exactly this. It was like a company dinner, like you just described, and we would have a small starter, some sort of soup. Then we would have typically every year, it was always the same at these award dinners, some kind of chicken dinner, and then a pudding. And a lot of these people were competing as bodybuilders, they like to stay in shape. So I would get their puddings, or I would have the extra chicken breast. So yeah, that was a thing that, do you want that? Yes, thank you very much. That'd be lovely. Oh, is it more cheesecake for me? That kind of vibe. So yeah, look, it's not an excuse to eat like a pig. But again, I was lifting regularly. I was actually doing some of the strength displays at these kind of things, and I was competing, as I say, even to the point of winning or getting sponsorship with athletes by various people to allow me to go to these places and compete in these places. So it was quite good. It was a nice thing. And again, I knew that Deca would work. I knew what my results were. And just being physically bigger improved my leverage for certain lifts and so on and so forth. And I was bigger on pressing and bigger on squatting, then I would be, all things being equal, able to train my grip harder to compete in the grip competition. Dbol, my first steroid ever. Never took crazy amounts. And we'll talk about dosage shortly. Kept it kind of low. I was actually doing a job that sometimes involves conflict with people by arguing and stuff like that. And my mindset at the time was, let's see how I handle taking a low dose oral steroid, Dbol, and dealing with these situations. Was there going to be a roid rage? No, not really. Me and you've actually argued this, Steve, when we've agreed on it, we've argued, debated it on the shows, that the pumps from Anavar can be physically uncomfortable. The pumps, to more or less a degree, for a lot of people on Dbol, are kind of pleasurable, as they are on Deca and SAS. So and it's one of those you're going to get a really quick response. I'll do the other story that I've told. I was given one cycle. I'd made the mistake of not ordering my Dbol ahead of time. I thought I had enough. I was wrong. So I have to order some Dbol. And a buddy gave me the remains of a bottle of Dbol. And unfortunately, this is one of the few times in my life where the product had no active steroid ingredient whatsoever. And I took this religiously for, I think, 7 to 10 days and had no response. And I knew how it worked for me. The legit Dbol turns up on a Friday, and from Friday to Monday, I put on 4 pounds. Now, as Steve said, some of that would be water, absolutely. Some of that was my body just going nitrogen/protein crazy and finally getting that anabolic kick up the arse. And again, both with Dbol and the Deca, even a little bit of water is fine because it increases my leverage. And I'll give you an example again, guys, and this applies to Deca and the sustenance cycles. My off in those days, off cycle bench press was the same as I did today for reps. Back in the day, I could do 170 kilos, which is 374 pounds for one. On cycle, I would do 418 pounds for one. So it made a 20 kilogram or 44-pound difference to my bench press. And if that's the bench press, that's the difference with all the others. So look, there are, as I made the comment about old guys laughing Deca for the reasons I talked about earlier on, we all have our favorite steroid oral or favorite injectable, our favorite stack. We know what works for us. And an enormous percentage of you listening, especially the older guys, will say, Deca, I fucking love it because I get big, I get strong, my joints feel better. Dbol, how many of you older listeners and even some of you younger listeners will be nodding along going, absolutely my first steroid. So for those of you that are new to this and thinking about bulking, there's a few of us out there going, give it a fucking try. You will absolutely love the results, especially if you use a legit brand like Pharmaqo. Let's talk a little bit about the options here, Steve, and how we would stack and cycle these products. I'll let you
Yeah,
start.
yeah. And we talked about it on the pre-show. Pharmaqo features three options with Dbol and Deca to fit your game plan, and they are dianabol 10 milligram oral. This is the oral version, requires you to simply take it via your mouth. Dianabol 50 milligrams per milliliter injectable. This is the injectable option, which requires you to inject it. A lot of people like to take that, pre-workout, maybe half a cc to get 25 milligrams. Nandrolone D, 300 milligrams a milliliter. This is a wonderful option because it's 300 milligrams a milliliter instead of the 200 milligrams a milliliter, which requires less injections and less volume. So back in the day, I used 200 milligrams of the Deca, but this is 300 milligrams. So this is nice because now you only if you want to do 300 milligrams a week, you only have to do 1 cc a week and you're done. So that's the cool thing about what Pharmaqo has the option. So let's talk about stacking options a little bit. So typically, the way people like to do this is because nandrolone is a long, very long ester. The nandrolone decanate is a long, long, long ester. It's going to take a while to reach peak in your system, while dianabol is a very short half life. It's only a 4 to 5 hour half life, so it's going to be in your system a lot quicker. So you'll notice it working within the first few days, while the Deca will take weeks, weeks and weeks and weeks to even peak in your system. So what a lot of people like to do is they'll start both at the same time, and they'll use the dianabol as their kickstart first 4 or 5 weeks, and that allows the nandrolone decanate to build up in your system. So by the time you stop the dianabol after 4 or 5 weeks, then you got enough of the nandrolone decanate in your system where you can start having it add. Now, a couple options for you. A lot of people like to add testosterone. I recommend a low amount of testosterone because what happens is I see a mistake people make a lot, and I made this mistake as well, is they'll use a lot of testosterone with it and they'll end up bloating up like crazy. And it's all water weight, guys, and we don't want water weight because it's going to cause side effects and other problems. So I wouldn't do it that way. I would run a very low amount of testosterone, maybe 100 or 150 milligrams at the most. And then I would stack Proviron. Pharmaqo also has Proviron. They have excellent testosterone options, but they also have excellent Proviron. And Proviron is very important when you're running a nandrolone. Proviron does a lot of things. It binds to SHBG. It helps free up more testosterone, but it also helps balance the dihydronandrolone, the DHN in the body. So I always recommend if you're going to use any type of nandrolone, whether it be nandrolone phenylpropionate or in this case the nandrolone deca that we're talking about, it's always a good idea to use Proviron the whole way through and make sure that you're balancing everything. Not just balance your estrogen, but also balance your DHN versus your DHT. That will prevent the dreaded decadic. Because a lot of people complain about the decadic. Well, I asked them, "Are you on Proviron?" They're like, "No, you should use Proviron. If you take the Proviron, it's highly unlikely you will get decadic when you use the Proviron." Mobster, how would you stack?
There's also an argument to be made, and we made it when we talked about Deca Dick on another show about those ratios of testosterone. Something else that's important, guys, and I will mention this also when I talk about how I stack these things. Be aware if you're out of condition, i.e., too fat, too bulky already, and decide you want to get bigger and heavier, your the benefits and effects positive that you had when you were leaner or younger or in better condition is going to be different when you're bigger and fatter and out of shape and so on and so forth. And the guys sometimes when they're talking about decadic neglect to mention that they were 8, 9, 10% the first time they tried it and got great results, the same dose, but now they're 15, 20, 25% body fat and the results aren't as good. And again, we've talked about this when we talked about testosterone that use some of the ancillaries for Pharmaqo, so have an AI and so on and so forth. Yeah, look, dosage wise, I've run Dbol on its own, 30 to 50 milligrams. We typically talk these days about 4 to 8 weeks. I've done multiple Dbol cycles, run solo, 8 weeks, many, many times. Nowadays, for various reasons, my preference has gone towards 4 weeks. But like Steve said, the Deca thing building up in your system, and I'll touch upon this as well, Steve. So it is the way that I would probably do this now. 30 to 50, I'd probably go 30 milligrams of Dbol. I don't get better results really at 50. 30 works. I blow up. Why fucking go 40, 50 if I don't need to? And I would do that for 2 to 4 weeks at the beginning. I would then run the Deca for 8 to 12 weeks. My preference is for the shorter period, but that's just me personally. And be aware, because of that build up in the system that Steve described and the half life, etc., it still means, as I've discovered, I mentioned this on other shows, why am I still hitting big fucking numbers post cycle? Because it's still in your system. So understand that there's that element. Most people, I think, Steve, would go 12 to 16 weeks on the Deca, especially in your off season, and 4 to 8 weeks on the Dbol. Dosages, if I was running Deca with Dbol, as I said, 30 milligrams, and a Deca, If I was running on its own and I didn't want to put on 20 or 30 pounds or something ridiculous, I'd probably keep it to 300 to 450. And my favourite's always been to run that, as many listeners will know. And as I said earlier on, with Sustanon. And I found that the sweet spot for me for those two in combination, again, you could use Pharmaqo products, would be around 800 milligrams ish per week. And that's a combined total. Deca doesn't need to be injected that often. When I've done the Deca and Sustanon cycles, it's roughly once every 4 days. I just work out the numbers for the week so I know where I am. And I believe, Steve, I've always run the Deca slightly less than the Sustanon, or slightly less. But we're literally talking about 50 to 100 milligram difference between the two. It's when I think sometimes people get a little bit too far out of the 150, 200 milligram difference, they start to see issues again. And it's just that ratio. Again, this will come from personal experience. You start with the numbers that we're talking about. You start with the templates you might see on the forums, and then you allow for your experience, your body fat, your condition, your aims in the cycle, and so on and so forth, to just manipulate it. But it's more or less slightly, it doesn't have to be, I think, not 50-50, one slightly higher than the other, but not stupidly slow, not 250 milligrams of, say, Deca and 500 milligrams of Sustanon or 500 milligrams of testosterone. That doesn't seem to work for most people, regardless of condition. But also, like I said, be aware that your condition, your body fat levels, where you started from in the cycle, and even age, Steve, you're not going to get the same results at 50 or 60 as you had at 30 or 20. It just doesn't work like that. But for most people, I would argue, in terms of we're looking at products here, etc., Steve, you will, it's going to be just one of those, you're going to do fantastically well on these stack and on these options. You're just going to get the fucking, you know, here's a thing, and let me play around with this a little bit as well as a topic of conversation. How does it feel? This is the experience thing again. Being the size of a house, how does it feel being that big? I don't care where you started from. I was an ectomorph back when I started, age 15 years of age. I don't know what I weighed then. I know what I weighed when I was 18. I was 175 pounds at 6'3". Ironically, the height weight charts, which are based from the 50s, and we're talking about the 80s for me, had me at 12 and a half stone, which is 175 pounds. So it was actually quite my ideal body weight. But pictures of me make me think my arms look skinny, etc. So the idea that I could train from there, and let me just play around with some of the numbers here. So, and I mentioned this at the beginning. I said I'd mentioned it in the experiences. I sit here doing this show with you now, guys. I think last week or the week before, I was 315 pounds at 6'3". On a Sustanon, on a Deca cycle, I've done a cut stack before for 4 weeks, and did a bulk cycle for 4 weeks. And I went from 327 to my all-time highest body weight ever of 336 pounds. I don't care how you fucking cut that. That is big. Even at 6'3", it's big. Physically, if I stand next to people in the gym, I'm big. I don't really see it because I'm in my own skin all the day. But I'm 6'3" and over 300 pounds. And I don't care if you're Steve's height or my height. You put on 5, 10, 15 pounds, it is transformative, Steve. I think Steve touched on it. The shirt sleeves filling out, the neck collar size had to be changed. If your trousers, your shorts, your pants, as the American call them, are tight on the thighs, even if your waist stays the same size. Bigger calves, Steve. Socks starting to get tighter. And the great one with bulking, and this is a little thing you guys can play with, is the idea of training like we're talking about, eating like we're talking about, doing this combination of Dbol and Deca, and going to see someone that hasn't seen you for a little while, let's say 6 weeks to 3 months, and going to visit. Go and visit an auntie. Go and visit your nanny. Go and visit grandpa.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah,
I went to
yeah.
see my mom, and
What the
she's
fuck,
like,
Steve? What the
she looked
fuck?
at my shoulders. She's like, "What the hell happened to your shoulders?" She's like, "Are you taking pills?"
I went down to see my mum once, Steve, and I believe I'm going to say under 300. I think it was 294 pounds. And my mum looked at me. She said, I can't get my arms around you for a cuddle. And she couldn't physically wrap me up. My mum's 5'8". She's not a tiny woman. She's old now, but she's not tiny. And she couldn't physically put her arms around me. And I've seen photographs of myself. And again, I don't really notice it. So I have to literally stand next, flex a bicep or flex a tricep in the gym. next to a buddy, and I said to my buddy, "Oh, you put on weight. You're looking bigger. How much weight have you added on since last year?" And they got up 5, 10 pounds. Oh, good. And I've been giving them, like Arnold says, I've been giving them the advices on training. And then I'll pop a quad or I'll flex my try. Look, stand the fuck away from me. You're making me look bad. No, 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 no. You're definitely improved. Yeah, but look how fucking big you are. So that kind of that's pleasurable. In its perverse way, it's pleasurable. If you're kind of underweight or you feel like you need to get bigger and you use Deca and Dbol to get bigger, that vibe, that sort of pleasurable sensation that your training is working, your diet is working, and these products from Pharmaqo, they're definitely fucking working. That's a vibe right there. And it's that, and you won't always see it, guys. The scale might show it, the tape measure might show it, but you see yourself in the mirror every fucking day when you're shaving or whatever, when you're putting your lipstick on, if you're a lady or whatever the fuck. You see yourself all the time. Transformation slowly, a pound here, half a pound here, quarter of an inch. Go to see someone that hasn't seen you, like your mum, your auntie, your nan, whatever, grandpa, some old buddy that you haven't seen for a few weeks. Go and check them fuckers out. Oh my God, Stevesmi, what the fuck have you been doing? Are you on pills? Steve, I can't get my arms around you. That kind of, it's that weird fucking, it's because they haven't seen you, so you will transform. I'll give you a silly little example, and I've told this story before on one of these shows. 18 years of age, working in an office, first job, furniture showroom, then an office, same company. And because I hadn't accrued any time off, I didn't have a holiday for about 15 or 18 months. Holiday finally comes up, and I went away for 2 weeks. Ate Wheater's weight gain number 7, which was skim milk powder and sugar. I didn't know that at the time. A bag of mince with some vegetables, and I put on, I think, 11 fucking pounds in 2 weeks, training every other day. Upper body one day, rest the next day, lower body the next day.
You're just trying to sell people steroids, bro.
Well, we're promoting Deca and Dbol here from Pharmaqo. So
It reminds
listen,
me,
this is. I came back. I went away a boy, and I came back a man. And the office
like
secretary,
Body Monster, it makes the man,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So it was weird because the three girls that worked in that office, one was the accountant. We had a Chinese accountant. We had a white English girl that was the secretary, and some other woman. I can't remember. It's a long time ago now, 1982. And they all looked at me like, "What the fuck has happened to you while you've been away?" Because I came back with a tighter shirt, tighter collar, tighter arms, tighter legs, etc., etc. So yeah, listen, just a vibe right there. And again, you can cut down and bring that six pack for the summer and get chiseled or so on. Listen, why do we talk about companies like Pharmaqo? Why? Well, we've just given you some of the examples of their products. I literally looked for pre-show research, and I do this every time we talk about a sponsor or an approved source product lines. And I said, look, there's like 6 pages with some domestic options and obviously international options of pretty much every product. They got a Femavar that I'm looking at here, Steve, which means it's low-dose Anavar just for women. It saves the ladies having to split the pills up. They have a fast rip 150 that I'm looking at. They have different options I've talked about already on the Nandrolone Decanate in terms of the phenylpropionate, so the faster version of Deca, and the slower version of Deca, or the slower version of Nandrolone, should I say. Dbol options, including the injectable that Steve referred to. What's one of the things I really like, and I said this a few times when we've been talking about this particular brand, is how if you go to a pharmacy, what we would call a chemist here in the UK, pharmacy in the States, same thing, and you go to the pharmacist and you ask for your prescription, your script to be filled, they will open up the cabinet behind their counter. And in that cabinet will be all the approved prescription medications. And they all have a certain look, Steve, that screams pharmacy medication, screams what your doctor has given you a prescription or a script for, as we call it. Pharmaqo's products look like they come from those cabinets. They've deliberately gone for a look, especially on the injectables, which reassures you of the quality. And then we know, as we've talked about on these shows before, about random products being tested, what we call blind testing. There's in-house testing by a lab to make sure that the workers are doing their job. There's second-party testing or third-party testing where they send it to a lab outside. Most of the big labs, including Pharmaqo, use the same company. You can go online and check the reference number on a lab test against that company's website, the lab testing website, and see that the lab result and the website line up. So you know it's legit. And then you've got what's called blind testing, which is when customers like you, the listener, have taken that same product and paid for out of your own pocket the bucks to get a product tested. Now, we love that the most, purely and simply because it literally proves that the lab results are good, that the lab itself, the company that's producing the product, like Pharmaqo, is good, and you've paid for it. It's your money that's paid for that test. And those are the results that are the best, Steve. Why do we like Pharmaqo in that regard? We know of a one customer, one listener like that listens to this show that blind tested 10 different approved sources, including Pharmaqo. Every single product, including Pharmaqo again, came back within the allowable range that pharmaceutical companies have, which is, I think, 5 to 10%, depends what the product is. So your over-the-counter painkillers or whatever else. Every single one of those products, again, including Pharmaqo, was within 3%. Some were over 1 or 2%. Some were under 2 or 3%, but all of them within the deviation. That is the level of quality that back in the day, Steve, we had no fucking chance. You didn't know if it was a labeled product. You didn't know if the dosing was right. You didn't know if they'd swapped it out. You didn't know if it was an inert substance. You had no idea about bacterial risk of infections, etc. Now, with companies like Pharmaqo, you absolutely have high quality products that you can trust. And if you can't bulk on these two, then you're never going to bulk. Anything more, Steve, before we go into the disclaimer?
Yeah, come on the forum, do a log, get the Pharmaqo, post a touchdown of your Pharmaqo. We want to see it. Get your log going. If you want to put on some bulk,
Yep.
go for it. This is a great way to do it.
We love the community vibe, guys. As I said, even this show's been inspired by a community question. That's the way we put these shows together now. We want your responses. We want to know what you know. What's your experience using Deca? What's your experience using Dbol? What's your favorite bulking stack of all time? Have we hit the nail on the head? Did we make any mistakes? Let us know. We want the community input. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.